Hey guys, welcome back. Joe Brunsman, Insurance Broker of the Stars. Today I'm talking about how to hire like your business depends on it. I'm going to be debunking the most common hiring myths that are out there to hopefully enable you as a business to hire people that are more appropriate, that ultimately are a better fit for your business and can make your business more money. All right, before we jump into that, normally I actually talk about cyber insurance, E&O law, cybersecurity law, that type of thing. If you're interested in that subject material, this is my book, Damage Control, Cyber Insurance Compliance. That is where you can download it for free. Please feel free to like, share, comment, and subscribe. All right, now here are two things you probably care about. So if you're watching this video, I'm going to say you're most likely going to be a business owner. And when it comes to hiring somebody, there's really kind of two things that you would actually care about. One, are they the best candidate for this job, right? Are they a good fit? And two, will they actually work hard? Now, how do you go about answering that question? Well, traditionally, this is what businesses have done. They used interviews, they used personality tests, they used GPA, et cetera, et cetera. So we're going to go through each one of those briefly and talk about why they are absolutely an awful idea. Now, the first is going to be interviews. You'll get questions like this, like, what's your biggest weakness? Well, answering statistically irrelevant questions. Now, why do I say that? It's because really interviews as we know them actually have been around since 1921, so 100 years ago. And really kind of the father of these were Edison, where he asked a bunch of statistically irrelevant questions. It was more like a trivia game. Now, one, yes, you can have interviews that are statistically relevant, but you have to be able to ask the same questions over and over and over again. And you have to have a large enough sample set to make them statistically viable. So what does that really mean? You probably need the same questions over tens of thousands of hires or potential hires. And then you need to have those people work long enough within your business to figure out what actually worked and what didn't. For most SMBs out there, myself included, that's just not feasible. We are not that big yet. So most businesses, you might as well just kind of throw interviews out the door. Also, when you're asking kind of trivia questions or knowledge questions in an interview, what you're actually doing is you're testing something called crystalline intelligence, not fluid intelligence. What's the general difference here? Well, I'm no psychometrician, but the primary difference here is crystalline intelligence is the intelligence to be able to use what you know. Fluid intelligence is the ability to learn new things. And I think it's safe to say that in the modern world, things are changing very, very rapidly, so we want to look more towards the fluid intelligence than the crystalline intelligence. We can always teach people new things. There's almost an infinite number of ways now to make that happen, but they have to have the ability to learn those new things. So like if you're in the technology sphere, it's always changing. The technology is always new. If you're in more traditional fields, like such as accounting, the tax code is always changing. That's really where fluid intelligence is going to come into play. So interviews don't really work. Also, we know that within fractions of a second, you have already subconsciously decided if that person is an ally or they are a foe to you. That goes back to our caveman days. So pretty much everything after, say, the first 0.2 of a second, I believe was the study, is just completely irrelevant unless you have tens of thousands of people, you're asking the same questions in the same way over and over and over again. And once again, that's just not really feasible. Now, what about these great personality tests that everybody loves to talk about? Well, it turns out they're actually kind of not that great. So the biggest one when I was growing up, and I'm 36, is the Myers-Briggs test. So it turns out if you actually look into studies, there's about a 50-50 chance that your Myers-Briggs component, those four little letters that pop out at the end, that all of our teachers told us were magically going to tell us what we should do in life, that could change within just taking the test again within 5 weeks. So it seems to be kind of a good measure of how you represent how you feel at that particular moment in time. It's not a good representative of what you are as a human being, so therefore it's not really good for hiring. Also, if you do a little bit of sleuthing, you'll find the following. From the publishers of the Myers-Briggs, it is unethical to use the Myers-Briggs test for hiring. People of many different types excel at the same job for different reasons. Individuals should not be pigeonholed based on their personality preferences. So there you go. Don't use it. Now, what about GPA? Everyone always makes this big hubbub about GPA. Well, first off, you kind of have to assume that everybody comes from the same exact background. They had the same circumstances in college. So would you rather hire somebody who got, say, a 3.0 in college, but they were working two jobs, they were supporting their family while they were getting these grades, and they graduated within 6 years? Or would you rather hire someone who has a 3.7 GPA, who had a full ride scholarship, courtesy of their parents' bank account, has never worked a job in their life? It's really kind of hard to start balancing that out, right? Or would you rather hire a 4.0 student from the University of Michigan or a 3.0 student from Harvard? How do you even begin to compare and contrast those two uniquely different people? Well, it turns out that they've done studies on how closely correlated GPA is to success. And you'll see here from the authors of this study, college grade point average as a predictor of adult success, a meta-analytic review, and some additional evidence. If a relationship does exist between GPA and job success, it is tenuous at best. The use of GPA in this capacity is not recommended. And by the way, this study came out in 1989. So this is not new information. Now, Josh Bersin, who's Bersin by Deloitte, it's the HR arm of Deloitte, had this to say: companies want someone who thrives on challenge and is willing to learn something new. And I think if you're watching this video, you probably fit in that category. Likewise, you want people in that category. You just don't want to hire a static thing. You want someone who could come to you with the ability to learn the job as the requirements of that job actually adapt over time. They want a seeker of information willing to adapt. If you're the type of person that wants to be told what to do, you might be a straight A student. In fact, you might even be a better student than the other type of person. And there's always that old saying that, B students work for A students work for C students. That's really kind of where this is all driving to. Now, what if you just had all the information in front of you? What if you were a giant business and you had those tens of thousands of hires with structured interviews, the same questions over and over and over again? What would that actually look like? Well, from Laszlo Bock, he's actually the former head of HR. They had some other fancy title for it at Google. And this is actually what he found out after crunching the numbers. Unstructured interviews will give you about a 14% input on what that person is like. Reference checks, 7%. Work experience, 3%. Work samples, 29%. Now, in perfect totality, that's still only, say, roughly about 50%, maybe a little bit less there. But that's assuming that nobody lied. And we know that people lie on job interviews. They lie on work experience. You can go and look up the statistics on that, depending upon your particular field of expertise. But it is absolutely rampant. So I think that really plays negatively into these percentages. So let's go ahead and change gears here. Let's think about, I've just come to you with problems. I've said, hey, everything you've done in the past, the science simply states it does not work. So what can you actually do? So let's play a game called Would You Rather. Would you rather, if you were trying to maximize your lifetime success and income, would you rather be born into the top quartile of intellect in the United States, or would you rather be born into the top quartile of family incomes? Well, it turns out that you would much rather be born into the top quartile of intellect. Now, if you're not familiar with the study of intellect, briefly, I'm just using the Stanford Binet scale here of IQ. That is generally what it looks like. If you want to read through that, you can go ahead and pause the video here. But let's look at fields of study and median starting salary based on those fields of study. And pause the video here if you'd like to. Go ahead and find your vertical. But I think it's safe to say that generally it kind of makes sense, right? So if you're a physicist, if you're a mathematician, you're obviously going to be making more as a median starting salary than my profession, which is insurance agent. And I think we kind of understand why that is, quite frankly. Or if you're comp sci or if you're IT, obviously the starting salary is going to be a lot higher there. Why? Well, when you start bringing in median IQ into this particular equation, you can see it just kind of makes sense, right? If you have a standard bell curve, the more standard deviations you go to the right, so the higher the IQ score, It's just the fewer people that are going to be there. So if you have a highly complex, ever-changing job, or you have something that is just deeply intellectual, it's just really hard to find those people to do those jobs. So generally, you're just going to have to pay them more because there's just fewer people who would be willing to do that. That's why you see average IQ of an insurance agent at the bottom, which is 104, below fashion designer and nurse. It's obviously the salary is lower. Why? I mean, like if I wanted to go hire someone for my brokerage, effectively I could just flip a coin and I'd probably be okay. If I just wanted to hire an average person, right? 50-50 shot, I'm going to be fine with that. You probably don't want to do that in your business. Neither do I want to do that in my business. So why not just use IQ tests for hiring? We know that the greatest predictor of lifetime success and income is actually very closely correlated to IQ scores. So you're sitting there and you're like, hey, why not just give somebody an IQ test when they walk through the door? And then if they score high enough, obviously they're capable of learning whatever it is I need to teach them. We'll just go along the way. Now I have this rock star of an employee. Well, it's not that simple. So if you go back to 1971, Griggs v. Duke Power, it turns out that IQ tests for employment are illegal. So that kind of squashes that, but maybe not. They're kind of sort of illegal, as it turns out, because there's actually more to the story here. So one, any of my former fellow veterans out there, former military members, we all had to take the ASVAB or some equivalent to that, right? So the ASVAB is essentially an IQ test. Likewise, we have the Wonderlic test, which is put out by the NFL. Now, let's look at quickly Wonderlic scores by profession. Obviously, there's going to be nothing mind-blowing here. You'll see that generally the higher the Wonderlic score, well, the more complicated the job. So you'll see as we go down, you're more than welcome to pause the video here if you'd like to look more into that. So we know that IQ is really a major factor here. There's also another factor we're going to talk about here in a second. But if you can't use IQ tests and you're not the NFL and you don't want to use the Wonderlic test, what could you actually do? Well, it turns out that we could actually just play a game. Now, before I get into this, no, I do not get paid to bring forth this consideration to you. I'm just a big fan of this test. Every person I've given it to, they've come back to me and they're like, wow, this is incredible. I can't believe it. I've had people use it on their kids before they go to college. They've saved hundreds of thousands of dollars potentially, and it turns out their kids actually did very well in their chosen occupation. So this is just an example right here, and you'll see, if I move my little bubble, there we go. You'll see this is just kind of like a pipe dreams game. This is one of the 3 games that you can actually play, and this is a game called Knack, K-N-A-C-K. You can download it from the Play Store as well as, I believe, whatever the Apple equivalent is. I'm an Android guy. And you'll say it's kind of like pipe dreams where you have to line up the blocks, and then it gives you a score. Likewise, here's another one for you. And yes, these look absolutely ridiculous. This is one where you launch water balloons at flowers, and you've got the little guys on fire coming your way. So it just looks absolutely preposterous, right? I will give you that. Let me move my bubble back. Now, before you think I'm just completely insane here and you're like, hey, you were a man of science and now all of a sudden you are not a man of science and you're recommending this silly game called Knack, well, it turns out they're actually very well published. So you'll see right here, the International Journal of Medicine, Medical Education, can video game dynamics identify orthopedic surgery residents who will succeed in training? What about these two? Veterinary practitioners, personal characteristics, and professional longevity. The game, that's the other game where you serve sushi to people with different looks on their faces. This one from Circular Research, Adapt or Perish, updating the pre-doctoral training model. All of these cited this particular game. So the future is now. Now, maybe you're thinking to yourself like, hey, I don't want to be the first company to do this. I don't want to bring this up to my boss. He's going to think I'm insane, or I don't want to bring this to my fellow partners because they're going to think I'm just off my rocker. Well, one, you could just have them play the game themselves, and I think they'll be duly impressed. But just in case you wanted to know, these are some companies that have actually used this game. So you'll see it's not just as simple as, you know, random guy Joe here, insurance broker on the internet saying, hey, this is a great thing. These companies have likewise found success. And if you actually go, you'll find out a number of companies have said, hey, we have taken our inappropriate hires down to 0 by doing that. And as a fellow business owner, I can confidently say that is a huge saver in terms of both energy, time, and money that it takes to hire and train somebody. You don't want to be hiring somebody that's just not even interested or biologically wired to excel at that job. Now, what can these games actually tell you? Well, it turns out they can actually tell you a lot. So first, you'll see these career knacks here. And as we go through here, you'll see we got a lot going on. Right, so you'll see, let's say auditing accounting. Let's say that you want to bring in a bookkeeper to your business, or you're an accounting firm and you want to hire someone who is just naturally, biologically somehow wired to enjoy accounting. Maybe you're a financial advisor and you're like, hey, I need to bring someone in to be a financial advisor. How do I know that they're actually going to get licensed to do this? How do I know they're going to pass the test? Maybe you're interested in cybersecurity down here, or tech support. Or maybe you need to bring in somebody for sales and you're like, how do I know that they're actually going to enjoy sales? How do I know if they have that, just that knack, right? To use the term here, that they're going to be good at that. Well, this could be a way to do it. And of course, if you need to bring in an office manager, you need to bring in someone for HR, right? Those are jobs where, hey, maybe they've had no experience in the past, or maybe you're in a really unique occupation and there's just really kind of nobody, no other business you could pull them from where they would know what to do and you're going to have to train them. Well, that would be a great way to get someone who's just most likely going to naturally excel at that job because they're just wired that way. Now, here's kind of some other knacks, and these are more of like personality traits. So you'll see here working collaboratively. If you want someone to, critical thinking, taking ownership, leadership, digital mindset, et cetera, et cetera. Now, these are some of the other jobs that you'll see here. And funny enough, these were actually my knacks when I took this test. So actuary, auditing, accounting, sales, engineering, lawyer, and cybersecurity. So it turns out I have a bachelor's degree in robotics, so that's engineering. I have a master's in cybersecurity law, so that would be the lawyer/attorney on the bottom. And as far as cybersecurity goes, I am always interested in that stuff. But it turns out I'm actually a former IT as well. So for what it's worth, for a sample size of 1, I would say that this thing is pretty remarkable. Now, how does this actually work? You're probably wondering. I have played those little games I don't know how many times trying to figure that out. Frankly, I just have no idea. As a matter of fact, I thought these things were so cool that a couple years ago, I just befriended the owner. I just started talking to him because I was like, hey, this is amazing. How does this work? Like, where are you going with this? Like I said before, there's no kickback here if you play the game and it costs you $1 or something to get your knacks at the end. What I really think it is I think it's a very well disguised IQ/personality test. Now, we've gotten to, okay, would they excel at that job? Are they naturally wired for that job? The second question that you want to know is, will that person actually work hard? And it turns out there's a way to test for that. So it turns out that some people are just naturally wired to work very hard. There's some people that are more leisurely and lackadaisical. And there's various evolutionary reasons behind why we have that spread of individuals. But in today's society, we just want people that are going to work hard. Why do we want that as business owners? Because we're paying their salary. Right? And not to be too cynical here, but kind of the gist of capitalism is you're trying to extract as much resource out of that person as possible for the amount of money that you're paying them, right? It's the great handoff there, right? The great balancing act. So there's kind of a couple things you need to be aware of. One is called the Pareto principle. You'll also know that as the 80-20 rule. So that's the height of trees, the density of stars. I mean, it is literally just, for whatever reason, it is everywhere in almost every single element of both society and just the galaxy, actually. Now, a corollary to that is called Price's law, and that is half of work performed is done by the square root of the staff count. So what does that actually mean to you? It means that, let's say you have 100 partners or 100 fellow firm owners. 10 of those people are going to do half of all the work. And it really doesn't even matter the size of your organization. That element still holds true. The Pareto principle, you can think of it as 80% of your revenue comes from 20% of your clients. 80% of the work output is going to come from 20% of your staff. Or put another way, half of all the work performed is going to come from the square root of the number of staff you have. So what you would really want there, and this is a visual representation, so you'll see here on the vertical axis, that's employees in either category. At the very bottom, you should be able to see the yellow line is average employees. The green is the extreme achievers. And this is the amount of work done. That would be on the horizontal axis there if we had enough room for it here. And you'll see, you're like, hey, wouldn't it be great if I could hire this many people right here as opposed to this many people? So if I could have, say, 15 people who ultimately are doing the work of 120 average employees, man, would that be a profitable business? Well, how do you actually do that? And what does this actually mean? Well, it means that large corporations ultimately, and you can just see this by looking around, they will ultimately always collapse under their own weight. There's just going to be too many people in that organization. And because organizations traditionally have not screened for what we will call conscientiousness moving forward, so that's work ethic, they always just fall into the yellow line of this graph as opposed to the green line. Now, what this also means, this is from Validity and Utility of Alternative Predictors of Job Performance by Peterson, that a firm of 10 people screened for conscientiousness would outperform their peer group of, say, 10 randomly selected people, generally by an average of 3.5 million in additional revenue over a 5-year period. So what does that actually mean? That means that not only could your business make more money, you would have harder working employees. It also means probably less stress for you as a business owner. It also means you could overcompensate those employees to a point where there would just be nothing else out there in the workplace or in the workforce where they could find any sort of comparable salary. So it's also good potentially for employee retention. Now, how do you actually test for conscientiousness, this work ethic that I've been talking about? Well, there's something called the Big Five personality test, and this is really kind of like one of the foundations of psychology. This has been statistically validated by I don't know how many tens of thousands of studies by this point. So here's what you have: openness, extroversion, agreeableness, neuroticism, and conscientiousness, also known as OCEAN. Now, conscientiousness, you'll see efficient versus easygoing. What do you probably want in your business? Efficiency, right? You want to maximize efficiency in every single way possible within that business. I will just have a quick aside here. You need to be careful. If you're a business owner, please be careful. If you are actually screening for conscientiousness, there is the potential there that you could hire people where you're just going to say ready, go, and they're just going to keep sprinting. So don't be afraid as a business owner to pull those people back and say, hey, you're doing a great job. You're doing awesome for the company. You're making us a lot of money. You're amazing at your job. Take a break, right? Don't let kind of like that mental health aspect outrun themselves. You really, really have to be careful about that. There's some good studies out there on that. So just saying, make sure you're watching out for your people. I think every good leader actually does that. Now, there is actually a Wonderlic five-factor personality test that you could likewise incorporate into your hiring method. Now, let's talk about legal considerations here. So before I said, generally screening for IQ is illegal. That was Griggs v. Duke Power previously. So here's kind of some legal considerations you'd want to think of if you're, say, going to incorporate the knack cell phone game as well as the 5-factor personality test. Let's see, Title VII of the Civil Rights Act, the Equal Pay Act, American with Disabilities Act. So if somebody just doesn't have, like, say, a thumb, or they don't have, for whatever reason, like the proper dexterity to play that cell phone game, like that could be a potential issue for you. Outside of that, I really haven't found any circumstance where that would be illegal, but nonetheless, seek advice from your employment practices insurance company as well as competent legal counsel before you start implementing these measures. I know it sounds very, very juicy to do this, and you're like, man, I can't wait to get this done. Like, I could hire someone who is just completely interested in this job. They're just biologically wired to do it. So they're going to love the material. And oh, by the way, these guys, like, we're going to have to tell them to go home. They're just going to work until we shut the lights off. But before you do that, seek competent legal counsel. Employment law is quite a bear. Likewise, I'm going to post right above where you can learn more about employment practices insurance, which I also do. Now, once again, this is my book, Damage Control, Cyber Insurance Compliance. I hope you enjoyed this presentation. That is where you can download it for free. And oh, by the way, if you found this useful, please like, share, comment, and subscribe. Tell me what you think. Please play the game. Put it in the comments below if you enjoyed it or not. Right above me here should be a new video for you. And right over there should actually be a beautiful little picture of my face where you can subscribe. All right, with that, stay safe.